Let's see that. Hey everybody, how's it going? Hopefully you can hear me. Thanks for joining us today. We have a good group of people. We have a great presentation coming up for you. Our guest speaker is Jim Bauer, correct? Mm-hmm. And he's going to be talking a lot about challenging jobs, maybe dealing with some stress, those sorts of things, healthy strategies to kind of combat that stress. I know I shared a little bit late with you some videos, so hopefully you were able to maybe watch one or two, but if not, he'll probably touch on those with you. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box. Of course, you can probably mute your mic, but if you have any questions, type them there. And then when he's done, I'll have him turn it back over to me, and I'll go over the logistics of everything that's been due and what's coming up and what is due by midnight tomorrow. So here we go. There you go. Cool. Thank you so much.
I might need you to show me how to turn this mic or turn this off.
Oh,
hi, folks. I'm Jim.
You may do that.
Oh, there we go. So hopefully you can get an idea who I am. I'm Jim. I'm one of the counselors on campus, and I'm gonna go ahead and click this off because it's just interesting watching me talk.
Perfect.
There we go. Okay. All right.
We can even hide it, so you don't even have to look at it. Just click here. Sorry, I'm trying. There you go.
There we go.
You don't even have to watch.
All right. Well, welcome. Hello. Hopefully everyone's doing well today. Let's see here. Just want to get going with the slides here. Here we go. Okay. So today's agenda, we are gonna talk about job burnout and everything else. So that's me. You can contact me at jdbauer@wccnet. If you have any questions after this presentation, I'd be happy to answer them. So I guess what I'd like to do is start off with just a quick introduction. I'd like to get a sense of who you are, what brings you to WCC, and maybe what is one of your strengths. So while you guys are thinking of one of your strengths and what brings you to WCC, I'll kind of give you a brief introduction of who I am. Again, I'm Jim. I'm a counselor on campus, so I work with students doing all sorts of stuff, whether it's academic advising, career counseling, or personal counseling. I received my training from EMU, so not too far away from WCC. And what brought me to WCC? Well, it's close to home, and I really like the mission of the college. Being an open door institution is something that kind of sings to my heart, so I really enjoy working here. One of the strengths, I would say, for me is connecting with other people. I really enjoy working with students one-on-one and really enjoy kind of hearing their stories. So hopefully we can have some folks chime in here, and there we go. Looks like we got Simone. Let's see here. Well, welcome everyone. Continuing education. Okay. Yeah, apparently they're all just highs. Hands-on, excellent. Strength is helping others, awesome, Joanne. Welding, positive attitude, excellent, Ryan, thank you. Close to home, excellent, thanks, Jacob. All right, we'll let other folks just kind of chime in. We'll keep on cruising here. So the topics we're going to try to cover today, we're going to define challenging jobs and the conditions that they inhabit. We're going to define what stress looks like. We're going to look at job fit. We're also going to look at some of the warning signs of stress and some of the interventions that you might use. And then we're going to look at some steps kind of moving forward. Hey, Wanda. And Pamela, thank you for joining, helping problem solve. That's awesome. Morgan. Looks like we've got some excellent group participation here. All right. So when I created this presentation, you do what you have to do, which is how you start any presentation, which is doing a Google search. So I just did a quick, simple search on looking at challenging jobs. And this isn't like an exhaustive list, but it certainly gives us an idea of some of the most stressful jobs out there. Any job can be stressful. It just kind of depends on the individual, but these are most commonly some of the most stressful. Being a psychiatrist, a president, a prison warden, mental health counselor, a first line supervisor, so like police, being a pilot or being a air traffic controller, surgeon, and the list kind of goes on. So I'm sure some of you guys will kind of chime in with some ideas of other stressful jobs if you want. All right, so let's take a look here. What makes a job stressful or challenging? What stressful or challenging jobs have you had? I guess that would be the first question. And then what made them hard to deal with would be the follow-up question. And normally I usually talk about, or excuse me, have a video to the I Love Lucy clip. Some of you might be familiar with I Love Lucy clip where she's working at a chocolate factory and there's bonbons going across a conveyor belt, and the boss comes in and says, hey, you need to make sure all these bonbons are wrapped, and before they get into this other window, if one of them is unwrapped by the time it gets to the other window, you'll be fired. I'm like, okay, a little bit of pressure. The bonbons come, they're nice and slow. She's wrapping them, she's thinking it's easy. The boss comes back to check up on them. Okay, yep, it's looking like it's going well, speed it up a little bit, and then they speed it up and it turns into this melee of like bonbons having to be, put into their chef hats and eating them just so that they don't get fired. And it's a good illustration of like sometimes what it feels like to have a stressful job. Let's see here. We've got some people, let's see here, exploring. Worked in the ER, very challenging days, I would imagine, Joanne. U.S. Navy, thank you for your service, Ryan. Working in assisted living home, yep, that can be extremely stressful, yep. Army medic, thank you for your service, Stuart. Let's see here. Nanny, yep. Uh-oh. I can understand that, Pamela. Let's see here. Restaurants and gas stations, yep, yeah. Thank you, Simone. Let's see here. Catering for sure can be challenging. Oh yeah, hitting those deadlines, making sure everything's perfect, having everything kind of coming out warm all at the same time. That's hard. Let's see here. Being a cook, yep. Oh yeah, very stressful. Hot under the collar, getting burnt and cut all the time. Let's see here. Working at a hospital. All right, excellent. Thank you guys so much for participating. One of the jobs that I had that was really stressful was a couple colleges ago where I worked. I had multiple hats, and that was the thing that made it really, really stressful. I did, in my mind, kind of too many functions. I was like a jack of all trades, master of none, and they just kept on adding more and more to the plate, and it was too much pressure, and they expected too much out of you. And really, what we needed was another person to kind of help share the load. So we'll talk about some of these things kind of moving forward. Okay, so the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, abbreviated as NIOSH, they did a report and a study. And so they looked at, job stress. And so this is just kind of a little bit of a nice little kind of definition here. Job stress can be defined as the harmful physical and emotional responses that occur when the requirements of the job do not match the capabilities, resources, or needs of the worker. Job stress can lead to poor health and even injury. Okay, so I think we all inherently know that. We didn't need like a fancy study to prove this. However, it's important that these studies do exist because it allows social researchers to kind of prove to industry that, hey, maybe we should have an extra day off on such and such day, or hey, maybe you should have a more family-friendly policy in terms of paternity leave or maternity leave. So continuing with this, the job conditions that could lead to stress, according to the NIOSH study, it could just be the design of the task. I mean, you could be working way too many hours, doing too many tasks all at once. The workload could just, be too intense. The workers aren't able to use their actual skills and talents. Could be management style, poor communication from the organization, not really allowing any input from the workers in the decision-making process of their day-to-day lives. And again, just lack of family-friendly policies. Interpersonal relationships, I mean, this could just be discord between you and a coworker or between, you and a supervisor, feeling not supported in any way. So these are all just, simple ways that can kind of impact our job stress. Continuing with that list could be our work roles, whether the employee's expectations are just unclear. I think we've all can kind of relate to working at a job where the boss wants you to do X, Y, and Z, but there's no real clear direction on how to do so. Could be just too many responsibilities, kind of like how I was mentioning earlier, wearing too many hats. It could be career concern, and what we mean by that is just lack of opportunity, lack for advancement, lack for promotion. You could be worried about the job being insecure. So any kind of instability within the organization can cause great stress on an employee. Sometimes organizations, they make really large, sweeping organizational changes, and they expect everyone to kind of just quickly adopt to this new policy. And that can be a real challenge to employees, especially if they are accustomed to doing something a particular way for multiple years. Environmental conditions. So this could be simple things like, if the environment that you're working in is dirty, it's heavily polluted, or there's, tons of noise, or you're sitting in chairs that really aren't designed for your body. Let's say you're a 6'7" individual and you're in a normal person chair, it's probably not going to be very comfortable. So those are all kind of conditions that can kind of impact the job stress. So stress and productivity in the job. So again, according to NIOSH, they're saying studies show that stressful work conditions are actually associated with increased absenteeism, tardiness, and intentions of the worker to quit their jobs, all of which have a negative effect on the bottom line. Again, I don't think we needed a fancy study to tell us this. I think that's all like inherently known knowledge. Continuing though, according to NIOSH, healthy organizations have been shown to benefit the worker in addition to the bottom line of the company. Healthy organizations will exhibit some of these characteristics. So they're actually going to recognize their employee for their good work. One case study that I like to provide is there's a book called It's Your Ship by Captain Abershoff. He was in the Navy, and he was a captain of, I believe it was the USS Benfold. And apparently at the time, it was one of the least fleet-ready naval ships. And so when he became captain, he made some changes. He would actually interview all of his crew, and then he would ask them, some targeted questions like, what do you think could change on the ship? If you could institute one small change, what would it be, et cetera, et cetera. He showed recognition for the crew by anytime there's a really good idea, he would announce it on the PA system and how it's actually going to impact the ship and its readiness. And then so it allowed them to focus more on doing trainings versus like maybe scrubbing down the sides of the boat where there's rust. They might change bolts out to stainless steel so that there was less rust on the boat. So small changes can really have huge impacts here. Other ways that organizations can kind of help promote a healthy environment would be actually having opportunities for career development. So if you're at an employment setting where they're not really willing to invest in you as an employee, that could be maybe a cause for concern. Maybe you feel kind of stuck. Maybe you feel like your talents aren't being utilized to their greatest potential. Other things could be just a culture that values the individual. I think we can kind of all understand that. I mean, it's nice to feel respected by your peers. And then management styles and actions that actually are consistent with the organizational values. So if the organization is really big on giving back to the community, but leadership doesn't display how they give back to the community, that could be cause for concern, right? It could be a management style or action that's not being consistent with the organizational values. So let's talk about stress. So there's a lot of different definitions about stress out there. This is kind of the one that I've settled on, and I think is kind of a really good illustration. It comes from the medical dictionary. Stress is defined as an organism's total response to environmental demands or pressures. When stress was first studied in the 1950s, the term was used to denote both the causes and experienced effects of these pressures. More recently, however, the word stressor has been used for the stimulus that provokes a stress response. One recurrent disagreement among researchers concerns the definition of stress in humans. Is it primarily an external response that can be measured by changes in glandular secretions, skin reactions, and other physical functions? Or is it an internal interpretation of or reaction to a stressor, or is it both? So again, I like this definition because it leaves it a little bit open. It talks a little bit about the science, and it talks about maybe the interpretation in terms of how we interpret the stress. So let's talk about fight or flight. So the fight or flight response is an interesting thing. Most of you are probably familiar with it or have heard of it in the past. The idea is that if we get into a sticky situation where we actually feel some type of threat to ourselves, think like a saber-toothed tiger back, a long time ago, something chasing us, the body has to prepare itself to do a few different things, and it could be fighting the actual scary thing, or fleeing, so flight, or freezing and standing still. And so when this happens, there's a whole host of chemical kind of reactions that happen. The body releases adrenaline and cortisol, and this is done to kind of protect us in the short term. There's a kind of, think of our brain, there's a tiny little almond-shaped part of the brain called the amygdala, and one of its functions is actually to kind of be scanning the room and looking for threats. And so we're hardwired to kind of almost be in this fight or flight response. And so when we go through this fight or flight response, some of these things happen where digestion slows, your heart rate beats much faster, your muscles become more tense, your skin, your blood vessels constrict. So blood that might have been in your abdomen is actually moving now more towards your limbs, preparing for fighting, preparing for running. Any type of healing process, so if you have like a cut on your hand and you're dealing with chronic stress, that cut is going to take a lot longer to heal because the stress, the fight or flight response is kind of overriding the system. So in terms of looking at this fight or flight response, it's the unchecked stress. It's the kind of chronic stress that we need to worry about. So unchecked stress can lead to headaches, digestive problems, high blood pressure, immune system impairments, depression, anxiety, arthritis, even allergies, and the list kind of keeps on going. And so this is a good time to pause and kind of make note of this link down here, Stress, the Portrait of a Killer. It's a really, really good documentary about stress and the kind of physiological responses. There's a biologist from Stanford University, Robert Sapolsky, really interesting guy. And he studied monkey troops in Africa and kind of the stress response that monkeys have, and based on different stimulus. So anyways, if you have about like a half an hour or so, I would say, invest your time in that. It's a really good documentary. So some other things, healthcare expenditures are nearly 50% greater for workers who report high levels of stress. And I guess, I think that's kind of common knowledge. Let's see, we got some people chiming in. My boss at my job, okay, yep. Working in the legal field, yep. I'm working in the hospital. Thanks for chiming in, guys. All right. So I guess the question is it the actual job itself? Well, no matter what the job is, stress is going to accompany it. I mean, I love my job, but there's definitely times where it's hard. It's very hard, just because of the volume of demands at certain peak periods. So, you can certainly still enjoy your job and it can still be fun, but it can certainly be stressful. So if the job is not a good fit personally, it may cause you some stress. If your skills and aptitudes and personality traits don't fit the job, it may be stressful. So again, you kind of need to know you And this is where this class is really a great lens into getting to know yourself. Megan, you guys did you have career assessments recently, or is that a part of it? Okay.
Yeah,
so I think,
their career
yeah. So, you know, some of those career assessments are really, really great in terms of helping you understand yourself more. And then the, you know, counseling office, you know, feel free to come. We have career assessments as well. If you want links to other career assessments, you know, don't hesitate to contact me. But getting to know yourself is really important. So the illustration I always say is, if you don't enjoy physical activity and working with children, it's probably not a good idea to pursue a career in physical education or becoming a Disney cast member wearing like a Tigger or Winnie the Pooh costume, because you're gonna have to be physically active, you're gonna have to interact with kids. So again, getting to know you, getting to know what you actually enjoy is gonna be really critical in terms of helping you manage chronic stress. So factors that lead to job satisfaction. These are pretty self-explanatory. So recognition of good work. Again, that's, you know, I think we can all recognize that when people recognize you for your good work, you feel good. You feel good about yourself. You feel proud. If there's opportunities for growth and development, that's important. Valuing the individual, management actions that actually match the organizational values, manageable workloads, working conditions, fair pay. I think that goes without saying. Intrinsic motivation, so that's kind of like more the internal, you know, you actually enjoy the work that you're doing and you actually see a purpose in it. And then the needs are actually met. So some of you might be familiar with Abraham Maslow, was a psychologist, and so he looked at the hierarchy of needs, and kind of down below on the lowest level is just some of the physiological things, so like food, shelter, safety, water, warmth, all that kind of stuff. And then it kind of goes all the way up to self-actualization. So it's really hard to kind of take care of yourself and not feel stressed if you're always hungry and cold and, you know, worrying about where you're going to be sleeping next. There's a fantastic video, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. Daniel Pink is a really great author. You might have seen some of his work in the past. There's a, gosh, what was his book? I think it was The Right Brain or The Creative Self or something like that by Daniel Pink. That was a fantastic book, but this is a great video, and it really does a really good job of looking at different like behavioral studies that show us why we actually want to do things. Case in point, it really boils down to like, are you intrinsically motivated though? So other factors that lead to job satisfaction, just work fit. So, you know, does it fit you and your abilities, like we mentioned earlier? And then you, just the individual. So, you know, in my estimation, I think everyone has a personal responsibility for our own stress reduction. We also have a personal responsibility for maintaining our physical health and our mental well-being. We also have a responsibility for fostering really good working relationships, you know, building up our interpersonal skills, so that you can kind of, you know, bring your adult to work, so that you're able to function and have some of those collaborative relationships. Knowing yourself, learning your triggers, your warning signs, knowing when you need to kind of step back from things. I often kind of talk to students in personal counseling about responding versus reacting. Responding is more thoughtful, reacting is more like just a knee-jerk reaction. And you can train yourself to respond in appropriate ways. You can almost have like back pocket responses already lined up for you if you're having an issue with a coworker and you can already kind of anticipate they're going to be griping at you about something. You can have a back pocket response to that. The example I often give with this responding and reacting would be like a trained boxer or UFC fighter. You know, they get punched, they get hit, they have to learn how to respond versus react. Reacting would be just them slugging it out. Responding would be a more intelligent way of defending themselves, slipping away, you know, countering, finding openings to kind of really win the match, so to speak. So again, and then just striving for a positive mental attitude is important. So some warning signs. This kind of gets into more the meat and potatoes of why we need to really take a look at chronic stress. And again, you know, I don't want to give stress a 100% bad name. Stress can motivate us, right? I mean, it can provide us enough kick in the pants, so to speak, to do the presentation, to do the, you know, the homework, to apply for the job. But what we're talking about is chronic stress, unmitigated chronic stress, where it's actually starting to impact you physically and mentally and emotionally. So some of the warning signs would be feeling sluggish, you know, disconnected, having anhedonia, which is just a fancy word for loss of pleasure in things that you used to have pleasure in. So if you used to like riding your bike and now you don't like riding your bike anymore and you can't really understand why, well, you know, let's take a look at your stress. Maybe you're just experiencing anhedonia. Higher blood pressure, your heart racing, feeling agitated. So like this tired and wired, you know, we often have students that come in and they're tired all the time, but they're unable to relax. If your communication style has kind of become less friendly, and you're more willing to snap at people, saying things that you didn't mean, that could certainly be something to pay attention to. If you think of often like quitting school or quitting your work, that could be another warning sign. And then just physical pains. You know, the brain, the brain stem's connected to the back, and so it makes sense why when we're feeling depressed or anxious, we get muscle soreness and pain in our back and necks. So pay attention to that. So some of these interventions, so things that you can actually do to really take care of yourself and bolster your wellness would be exercise. Exercise is the antidote to this fight or flight response. I mean, you know, zebras, you know, they often joke like why zebras don't have ulcers. Well, it's because anytime a lion comes after them, they run as fast as they can away from the lion, which helps reduce that fight or flight response. So they're actually doing what's intended for them once the fight or flight response happens. For us, sometimes that fight or flight response just keeps on going and going and going. We might not have a lion chasing us, but it might be dealing with traffic, dealing with deadlines. And if we don't physically let it out somehow, it's going to possibly cause us stress. I'm going to tread lightly here on diet. I'm not a dietitian, nor do I try to play one on the internet. What I would say is eating a more natural diet that emphasizes, you know, a higher vegetable and fruit intake. So really kind of a more nourishing diet. What I would say though is really pay attention to your alcohol consumption and your caffeine. Alcohol is a depressant, so it can actually make, you know, depression and anxiety symptoms worse. Caffeine is a stimulant, which can certainly make, for a lot of people, their anxiety a lot worse. So think of like, you know, for someone who has like caffeine sensitivity, and if they're already dealing with anxiety, think of caffeine just being like pouring fuel onto the fire. So just pay attention to how some of these, you know, things make you feel. Again, I think it's just everyone's responsibility to kind of tinker with their diet and see what makes them feel better. Other things that could be really beneficial, meditation, and that could just be kind of quietly sitting and focusing in on your breath. And anytime your mind wanders, just focusing back in on your breath. Could be journaling, could be prayer, could be just silent reflection. Those are all helpful things. Talking to a trusted friend, you know, everything doesn't have to be, you know, hey, go see a counselor, go see a social worker or a psychologist or whatever. It could just be, hey, I need to go vent to my best friend. You know, she always has really good ideas. So that could really help, you know, reduce some of the stress. And yes, there is certainly a time and a place to seek out counseling or mentorship. And I hope that you guys would take full advantage of that. Developing a game plan. Sometimes we feel stuck, and I think that's the thing that really causes us to have more chronic stress, is we just don't see a way out of it. So if you can kind of maybe work with, you know, a counselor or your friend or a significant other and talk some of these problems through, coming up with an actionable game plan can help really reduce that stress. And then just reading up on your concerns. So if you notice that you're continuing to have arguments with a particular coworker, maybe you look up some communication strategies. Maybe you notice that you are having just unrelenting anxiety and you don't really know where it's coming from, maybe you do some reading on anxiety to learn a little bit more about that. Other things, gratitude list. This is certainly an important thing. There's certainly some research regarding gratitude lists and actually helping to improve people's moods. I kind of view it, and this is a less scientific explanation, but I almost view emotions almost like as a magnet, where if you continue to think about negative things constantly, it's going to attract, and it's going to be easier to look and find negative things. But if you actively interrupt those negative thinking patterns by forcing yourself to at least come up with 5 things that you're thankful for each day, it's going to actually interrupt some of that negative thinking, and it's going to possibly cause you to start having hopefully happier thoughts. So I guess I want to ask you, because I'm always interested in picking students' brains, what are some things that help you reduce stress? I mean, for me, it's physical activity. Every lunch break, I'm over at the gym across the street on WCC's campus. I'm either swimming or running or lifting weights. Yoga, excellent. Thank you, Joanna. Working out, thank you. Meditating for sure, awesome. Any others want to chime in? Cool, singing. I used to be in choir. That was a lot of fun. Let's see here. For me, it's video games, yoga, going shopping. Let's see here, video games, sleeping. Yep, sleeping's a great way to metabolize stress. Hanging out with friends and family. Awesome. Thank you guys for chiming in. Playing piano, cool. Walking while listening to music. Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. So Martin Seligman is a psychologist, and he's kind of seen as the father of positive psychology. And he theorizes that while 60% of happiness is determined by our genetics and our environment, the remaining 40% is really up to us. So optimists are people who tell themselves a good story after a defeat. Let's see, we got some other people chiming in. Exercise, positive thoughts, walking, playing with the dog. Yeah, a little dog therapy never hurt, right? Disc golfing, cool. Thanks, guys, for chiming in. So some of you might be familiar with Pareto. I think that's how you pronounce this individual's name, but an Italian sociologist and economist, and he kind of theorized that 20% of your efforts actually yield 80% of the results. So if we actually applied this idea to our job satisfaction, what could possibly happen? So if 20% of our efforts yield 80% of the results, then shouldn't we spend more time figuring out what actually makes us happy and satisfied and motivated? So the average person works about 47 hours a week, according to the Gallup poll. And so if we just did some simple calculations here, and stick with me here, if the average person works about 40 hours a week, multiply that by 52 weeks in a year, that's roughly, 2,080 hours of work in just 1 year that you'll be doing. And so if you look at just this class alone, it represents, and this is where maybe my math's wrong, about 30 hours of your life in just this one semester. So that's only like less than 2% if you're following this whole like Pareto's 80-20 rule. And that's only, for a year. So this class is a really good class because it's hopefully helping you determine like what it is that you want to do. How do you see yourself? Where do you see yourself? And so I guess I would say it's reasonable, right, and appropriate that we all decide to do a little bit more self-exploration. And I would say that this self-exploration doesn't need to stop after just like one assessment, I think it's something that we all kind of continue to look at. I remember talking with my grandfather when he was in his 80s, and he was asking me what kind of career I was going after, yada, yada. And he said, well, Jim, I'm 80 and I still don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life. And I thought, that's such a good, positive outlook. Because it shows us more like willingness to continue to learn. So continuing with that idea, this ACS class is fantastic. There's also another ACS class, ACS 122, which is like a more career-focused class. There's There's career assessments you can do in our office over at the Student Center on the second floor at the Counseling and Career Planning office. And if you want links, if you're like a strictly online student, you want some links to other career assessments, feel free to ping me and email me, and I'm happy to send you some links. Job shadowing is huge. I mean, my wife, when she was at EMU, she thought she wanted to go into occupational therapy. She did a couple of job shadowing stints and realized that just wasn't a good fit for her personally. So, you know, instead of investing all this time and energy and money into going into a specific field, she, you know, had the wherewithal to actually like go and do some job shadowing. Informational interviewing is a fantastic thing to do. So the idea is essentially you just go try to interview people that you, with jobs that you might want to actually try. So if you wanted to become a teacher, then great, you know, you go interview some past teachers. You come up with a list of, you know, appropriate questions, you know, things that would be appropriate would be like, what do you see would be a challenge for a young teacher, or where do you see the field kind of going in the next 10 years? Inappropriate questions would be like asking them directly, like, how much money do you make? That's all stuff that you can kind of look up online and kind of get a sense and idea. So there's resources into that. We have all sorts of different college clubs on campus, so I'd encourage you to maybe get involved in some of those. There's all sorts of different online, you know, discussion boards, professional organizations you can join. You know, maybe taking some exploratory college courses could be helpful if you've ever thought of wanting to go into business. Hey, guess what? We've got an intro to business class. Maybe that would be a helpful thing to do. I'm really a big fan of Coursera. You can take free, essentially college level classes from like all sorts of really fantastic institutions like Harvard, Princeton, U of M, MSU, etc. And you can sample these classes and just continue to learn. And then just podcasts. You know, I'm a big fan of Rich Roll podcast. He's a triathlete guy and talks about wellness. And so just always trying to find ways to open up your mind, I think, is important. So some closing thoughts, you know, utilizing your resources. You know, the college, WCC does a really good job of making sure that we have resources for just about everything. And if we don't, then we're going to do our best to try and help you find an outside resource. And then just, you know, understanding that we're all in some sort of process. You know, none of us were born perfect. And I think we're all trying to move more towards that every day. Or at least that's my personal goal, is I'm trying to become a more perfect Jim. And a lot of that is just always trying to have an open mind and trying to learn more as we go. And then just taking responsibility for your happiness, because no one else is going to take care of it like you would. So some of the different resources that we talked about, some of the videos you can take a look at. I guess I'm just going to open it up to any questions if there's any questions. And if not, we'll turn it on back to Megan. I really appreciate you guys listening. Hopefully some of this was helpful. Feel free to email me if you have any questions that you're not wanting to ask, you know, on this forum. Again, I think, is my email maybe, or maybe you could put it on the,
Yep,
the website. Okay, yeah,
and
awesome.
they'll have this video as well.
Let's see here. Yeah, thanks. Let's see, we got one. So does WCC offer resources for job shadowing? Actually, the Career Services Office, they actually just moved. They're on the first floor of the Student Center. We would actually probably get you hooked up with Barb. So she looks at internships and co-ops. And so my guess is, yeah, there'd probably be some ways to do some job shadowing. If you're looking to do like a job shadowing situation, like with a specific person on our campus, my guess is, yeah, you know, I mean, because I've had people do informational interviews with me in my office. So yeah, I would say WCC is probably more than happy to have you do some job shadowing, but I'd probably start with Career Services. All right, I guess that's it. All right, you guys have a marvelous day. Thanks for playing along.
And thank you.
Yeah, that was great.
Pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, great meeting you too. Take good care.
Hopefully I'll see you next semester.
Awesome.
All righty, so let's go over a few of the things that we need to touch base on. That was a great informational session with Jim. So hopefully you got a lot of things out of that. And of course, contact him if you have any questions. So at this point right now, it looks as if everything through unit number 5, module number 1 should be completed. And I have graded everything pretty much through that point at this point. So if you're missing anything that should be graded right now that is not, please take a look. Always keep up with the grade book and alert me, because there are a lot of things for me to grade, so I don't want to miss anything. I'm here to help. So at this point, unit number 5, module number 2 will be due tomorrow night, Wednesday night at 11:59 p.m., which is the 7th. For that module, we need to complete the emotional intelligence video quiz, complete the emotional intelligence assessment, journal number 5 is due, and then of course, the time management for unit number 6. Are there any questions about any upcoming assignments or anything that you've completed that you'd like to get feedback on, or anything that's coming up that you're concerned about looking ahead? If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. If not, thank you, Maureen. Everyone else, just do that, type the N. Very good. All right, doesn't look like there are any specific questions. Of course, you're more than welcome to email me. Let me know of any questions that you have, and I will try and get back to you as soon as I can. We only have a few more weeks of meetings, so keep up the good work. And of course, get a hold of me if you need anything. And that is all I have for you today. So thanks for attending, and I will be talking to you soon. Take care.